My wife chose my son's best friend over our family, karma chose them both. I thought I had everything, an amazing wife, a son who was the pride of my life, and a beautiful house where I thought we'd live our dreams. But that all came crashing down in the most devastating and unexpected way. My name is Jason Miller, and this is the story of how my wife, Sophie, shattered our family, and how karma made sure they both paid the price. It started out like any other Sunday morning. I woke up early to make coffee, the smell of it filling the kitchen as I flipped through the newspaper. Sophie was still in bed. She had been sleeping in a lot lately, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just tired. Our son, Alex, was already up, ready for his weekend plans with his best friend, Mark. They had been close since they were kids, and Mark had practically grown up in our house. "Morning, Dad," Alex greeted me as he entered the kitchen. "Hey, buddy," I said with a smile, handing him a cup of juice. "You and Mark have a busy day ahead?" Alex nodded, tossing his phone onto the counter. "Yeah, we're going to the park later to shoot hoops, but I might stop by to hang out with Mark for a bit before that." "Sounds good," I replied, ruffling his hair. "Just remember, we're having dinner at 6. Your mom and I are looking forward to it." Alex smiled and nodded, grabbing a granola bar before heading out. As I watched him leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was quiet again, just me and Sophie. I knew it was foolish to suspect anything, but lately, I'd started to notice small things. Sophie had been distant, barely looking up from her phone when I walked into the room. Her usual laughter was muted, her attention drifting more often than not. It wasn't just her, though. It was Mark, too. Mark had been coming around more frequently, even though Alex was sometimes busy with schoolwork or his own friends. There were days when Mark would be at our house when Alex wasn't around, and Sophie would be different. I dismissed my concerns. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Sophie and I had been together for almost 20 years, since college, and I never imagined she would do anything to betray me. It was a week later when everything came crashing down. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just returned from work early. Alex had called me earlier in the day, telling me that he and Mark were planning to head over to a basketball game. He hadn't mentioned anything about Mark hanging out at the house. So when I came home to find Mark's car parked in the driveway, I didn't think much of it. After all, he was family. I walked in through the front door and froze. The moment I stepped into the living room, I heard Sophie's laugh, soft, almost seductive. I turned the corner and saw her, sitting on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her. But it wasn't just her. Mark was sitting next to her, too close for comfort, his arm around her shoulders. They were laughing, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was intimate. Like they had shared something secret. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Sophie's hand rested on Mark's thigh. I took a step forward, but the creak of the floorboards betrayed me. Sophie's head snapped around to look at me, and the smile faded from her face. Mark, too, looked up. But his expression wasn't that of surprise. It was one of guilt, mixed with something else. "Jason." Sophie started, standing up quickly. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear any excuses. But I couldn't stop myself. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice harsh, unrecognizable even to myself. Sophie looked at Mark, then back at me. She looked so ashamed. But not because of the situation, no, she was ashamed because she'd been caught. "Jason, I didn't mean for this to happen," Sophie stammered. "Mark and we. You didn't mean for this to happen?" I cut her off, rage boiling inside me. "What is this, Sophie? Tell me the truth." Mark shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at me. "Mr. Miller, I didn't mean for this either. It just happened." Sophie gave him a look, one that I couldn't quite understand. And that's when it hit me, she didn't even care that I was standing there. She didn't care that her own husband was begging for answers. She was too far gone. "What are you saying?" I spat, voice shaking. "You've been sleeping with my son's best friend? My son's best friend? In my own house?" Sophie's lips trembled, but she didn't answer right away. Mark finally stood up, his face flushed red. "I didn't want this, Mr. Miller," he said again, his voice almost pleading. "But we've been seeing each other for a while. I didn't know how to tell you." I was stunned, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "Seeing each other? How long, Sophie? How long have you been doing this?" She swallowed hard, then mumbled, "A few months now." "A few months?" I repeated, my heart pounding. You've been sleeping with him for months behind my back? While I've been working my ass off for this family?" Sophie winced, but didn't answer. And that's when it hit me, the realization that she hadn't even been ashamed enough to hide it properly. She hadn't even cared enough to keep up appearances. "You don't even look sorry," I said, disgusted. "You don't even care. You're too busy playing house with my son's best friend." Sophie's face reddened. "It's not like that, Jason. I love you, but I needed more. I needed someone who—" "Who what?" I shot back. "Who made you feel good about yourself? Who gave you attention when I was too busy with work?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "I want you out," I said coldly. "I want you to leave. Now." Sophie didn't fight it. She didn't argue. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with regret, but no remorse. The days that followed were a blur. Sophie moved out quickly, leaving with only a few suitcases of her things. I didn't fight her, didn't beg her to stay. Part of me wanted to, but I knew better. She had already made her choice. She had picked Mark over our family. Alex didn't know the full story at first. He came home later that day, looking confused when he found his mom's things gone and Sophie nowhere to be found. I told him she had left, but I didn't tell him why. Not yet. It was the next week when I found out just how badly karma works. Sophie and Mark had been seeing each other for months, but their secret affair didn't stay secret for long. Word got out, as it always does. Sophie was fired from her job because of her involvement with a colleague who also worked there. It turned out Mark wasn't just playing with fire, he was burning everything to the ground. He was seeing someone else, too. Someone even younger. When that news hit, everything spiraled. Sophie's reputation took a hit, and she became the talk of our small town. The whispers didn't stop. And that's when I knew. Karma had a way of catching up with people who thought they could live above it all. As for Mark, his reputation was ruined, too. He lost scholarships, and even his friendship with Alex was destroyed. I didn't have to say anything to Alex, he figured it out on his own. I had always told him to surround himself with people who had integrity. Mark had none. He was no longer welcome in our house, or in Alex's life. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, and while it hurt to see my son go through this, part of me couldn't help but feel a sick sense of satisfaction. Sophie and Mark had chosen each other, and now, they had to deal with the consequences of their actions. Months later, when I'd healed, I learned something important. Karma doesn't just catch up with the guilty, it also rewards the ones who are left standing. My son and I rebuilt our lives, stronger than before, and though I was no longer married to Sophie, I knew that in the end, the truth had come out. And the price of betrayal had been steep for both of them. And in the end, they paid. Karma had taken care of it all.